Okay, so this begins Module 3, Video 2, and this is the Rogers section. So this is the generation of innovations. I think it's Chapter 4. So we've got 6 main phases in the innovation development process. This is a line that comes out of the Rogers book: the recognition of needs and problems, basic and applied research, development, commercialization, diffusion and adoption, and consequences. So the 6 phases are somewhat arbitrary in that they don't always occur exactly as they are shown. Certain phases may even be skipped. And so you're going to see this is going to correspond with the S-curve of diffusion, and obviously there's going to be some things that are going to be skipped if you've got an R-curve or the straight up line curve. So it's all going to depend on the innovation itself, its relative advantage, etc. So we'll begin with the recognition of needs and problems. So the sources of needs recognition are often scientists. They give the example of the California tomatoes. There was a situation where the workers, the Mexicans that generally do the tomato harvest, were not available anymore, and so they had to come up with a new way, and they created a machine in order to do this harvesting. But this was all done with scientists and innovators that were very specifically focused on a particular need. There's also an example of politics with auto safety, where a lot of innovation like seatbelts and airbags and things came out of the elevation of the issues associated with automotive safety into the political sphere. And then individual inventors, so innovation comes from the outside. So this is consistent with what Utterback would say about innovation, that big companies are not necessarily going to innovate in their own space, and you'll see that down the road in these slides, that a lot of times innovations are going to come from outside of the company. So the next section, basic and applied research. So technology is a design for instrumental action that reduces the uncertainty in the cause-effect relationship involved in achieving a desired outcome. So obviously the technology itself is how do we get from here to here, and this basically allows us to very easily predict the path between one point and the next. The tools are defined as the material aspects, so equipment and products, and then the software is the knowledge and skills, procedures, principles that go along with the tools that make up the technology. So it's important that we define some of these terms, because obviously in our world technology really means like computers and things like that, and in Roger's world it's really more about the design, the whole idea of the innovation taking place. And so their example for software is Henry Ford's assembly line. So this was the idea of that mechanization of getting a car built in a very specific and very structured way. And then also the example of the Japanese quality control circle. So another good example of software. So ideas and procedures and principles. Basic research. At the academic level, these are original investigations without a specific objective. So people who go out and look for, new viruses and new, stars and things like that. This is basic research. We have no idea what's going to come of it. It's funded mainly by the universities and by, the National Institute of Health maybe, or National Science Foundation, where these are very respected researchers that are interested in something and they can move forward. Applied research is different. These are scientific investigations to solve specific problems. So these are, more directed. Here's what we need. This is more that, California tomato situation. Here's what's going to happen. We need a solution for this. So that's going to be more applied research. And then serendipity, the accidental discovery of a new idea. So this often happens, and this is one of those things where this is an outcome of maybe basic research, right? We don't know what we're going to get, but whoa, look what this will do. And a couple of the examples they gave were the 3M Post-it notes, which came out of a faulty glue that was supposed to be much more rigid, but they found a new use for it. We're going to read about the 3M story later on in the class. It really is a terrific story about how innovation takes place at 3M and how it is supported and the environment and the culture were able to produce something like, like the Post-it note. So this wasn't one guy thinking, wow, this would be cool, we can do this. It was a bunch of people saying, I could use it for this and I could use it for that. So the story in Rogers is a little bit different than what you'll read in the case study, but both really great stories about serendipity. And then the Rogaine story as well. So they were looking to develop something else, and they accidentally discovered that this minoxidil on the human skin changed the composition of the blood coming to the skin, and hair grew back. So a really nice discovery and a multi-million-dollar discovery for the company itself. So then we move on to development. So development is the process of putting a new idea in a form that is expected to meet the needs of the audience of potential adopters. So not necessarily the easiest thing to do, right? Because we don't always know the best, the best path for this innovation. So we may go down one path and, understand that there are, other ways to go. So the role of uncertainty in this space has a lot to do with understanding needs. So do we have the right audience for this product? Obviously, with minoxidil, the audience for the one invention was not the audience at the end of the day that actually benefited the best from the research itself. And then competitors. So you've got other people that are vying for attention from the company, attention from bosses, money from foundations, etc. So that influences the development of products. Can I go slower? Can I work through this? Or do I have to go straight here to get to someplace that can be funded? Government intervention. So this is a huge one. So especially when you're looking at medical research. The FDA and those that have to approve the use of these products can be a huge part of the uncertainty associated with development. Organizational culture. So we talked a minute ago about the 3M culture, and you'll hear in a minute about the culture at Xerox PARC and at Apple that provide for either a good or a slower development of an innovation. And then business profitability. There's a good story in there about the hum of the refrigerator that comes from electric refrigerators. I never knew that there was a gas refrigerator, and it was determined that the businesses that were investing could make more money on an electric refrigerator, and so that's the one that won. So where we have, the establishment of dominant design, which we'll learn about later in Utterback, it's where a whole bunch of products are being made to address a particular need, and at one point a dominant design is decided. One would generally think by the market, they buy it and it becomes the dominant design. But in this story, it was actually the businesses that decided, it was probably cheaper to make the electric one, and they decided, yeah, we're going to make a whole lot more money. They can deal with the hum. So there's a lot of things that contribute to uncertainty in development. And then the Skunk Works, a way of doing development, this is something that a lot of companies have. So in the Rogers reading, he just talks very specifically about freeing inventors from bureaucracy or organizational issues. And that is a big deal, because when all of that uncertainty is put on top of a creative person, an inventor, it really prevents them from moving forward. I remember working at a company, Polk, years ago, and they wanted to develop a new technology that would, one, help Polk move forward, but also to help other customers. And the environment inside the company was really difficult for people to come up with new ideas. And so the CEO at the time broke them apart and put them in another building miles away from the headquarters, and they didn't have any responsibility for reporting to anyone but him for several years while they worked on this development, and they were very successful. And he knew from his own experience that innovation and discovery can be absolutely suffocated by organizational politics and culture. And so these skunk works organizations are very important. So Xerox PARC was kind of like that. And you know, you read in the story about the fact that Xerox developed a whole bunch of stuff that they were not able to commercialize because, again, getting an invention or an innovation back into a, you know, very culturally stagnated maybe organization is tough. And Steve Jobs also had a skunkworks organization that helped develop the Mac, and he's also a part of the story later on with Xerox PARC. So a lot of interesting ways to look at that, but if you find you're in a position where, you know, an innovation or something needs to take place and it's being squashed by the culture, by the organization, it's important to be able to break them off so that they can work on their own. So technology transfer, so this is another part of development. So technology transfer is the exchange of technical information between the R&D workers who create the innovation and the users of the new idea. So it's a two-way dialogue to establish a mutual understanding. This is very important. So the book does talk about the idea that it might be one way where I'm the R&D person, I'm telling you, the user, how something's going to work. But in fact, it's a back and forth because the users are going to say, well, that's not going to work in my environment. I really need this to be like this. I need it to be this tall. I need it, you know, I need the handle to be on the right side, whatever it is. And that dialogue between the users, the end users, and the innovators is really important to understand how the uses are going to take place. There's a lot of dialogue in the Rogers book about Japan versus U.S. technology transfer and how much better Japan is at doing technology transfer. Now, I think some of that's been resolved. I mean, this book is very old, so this was, you know, obviously at the height of, you know, the 70s where the Japanese were crushing us in a lot of technology development. I think things have evened up a little bit, but I think the diffusion is better, is different in Japan, and especially in China. Goes so much faster because they're going to take something that someone else came up with and, you know, commercialize it. So it's just a very different culture, a different way of thinking. And there's an example in there about the VCR that the U.S. company completely missed out on the whole idea of a personal VCR for home use, and the Japanese just took it and ran. So that was, you know, obviously an example. There's also examples in automotive where technology to improve automotive practices were touted here in the U.S. and the U.S. rejected them, and the Japanese grabbed hold of it, and you got the Japanese production system. So that has happened in the past. I think we're better now, but that was something that was brought up. So 3 different phases within technology transfer: knowledge, the receptor knows about the new innovation, maybe through mass communication; use, the receptor has put the technology to use in his or her organization; and commercialization. So this is the receptor has commercialized the invention into a product that is sold in the marketplace. So the difference between use and commercialization is huge. So you might have an innovation that was made specifically for your company, specifically for a particular use, a particular department, or something like that. The commercialization meaning we have something that can help a lot of people do one particular thing, or a lot of people do a bunch of things. Commercialization is completely different because you're dealing with the market, you're dealing with a lot of different needs, and you're dealing with price points and affordability and things like that. So it's a much more intensive technology transfer. So then commercialization, the production, manufacturing, packaging, marketing, and distribution of a product that embodies an innovation. So the sources of commercialization are R&D and practitioners. Some examples of great innovation spaces were Xerox PARC, where half the top 100 computer scientists were working at the park at the time. They were recruited by Robert Taylor, who was a very well-respected individual in this space and was able to attract talent. Innovation was conducive, had a very conducive management style. So it was, and it's kind of very typical of when I worked for Sun. We had a very different culture in the development area than we had in the field and at headquarters. They had a much more lax style of clothing. They could wear whatever they wanted. Whenever we had people out to the field from development, I would have to warn the customers that he may show up in a mismatched suit in flip-flops with a Hawaiian shirt under his jacket, and with the long hair and and the ponytails and things like that. So it was just a very different person who was in this innovation space, and it was very important that the culture support them and provide for this imagination and creativity to be able to flow. Use innovations they created. So this was one of the rules of Xerox PARC. You had to be able to use the innovation. This was also something that Frank Lloyd Wright, which is one of our great architects, implemented at Taliesin West. So Frank Lloyd Wright originally did most of his architecture. He was from the Midwest, but he developed a respiratory issue and moved to Arizona. And a few years ago, my husband and I went to see his development area, and it's called Taliesin West. And one of the rules for the architects that came with him, it was a school for architects that's still in place actually. But one of the things he said is, whatever you design, you're going to live in. And it really makes the inventor think about what the consequences are of what he's doing. Is it big enough for me to stand in, or is it comfortable? And when you have to personalize the innovation, it really makes a big difference in how the actual development takes place. A couple of things, the right time, other innovations supported microcomputing. So Xerox PARC was developing a lot of pieces of the microcomputer, and it was the right time. So the microprocessor had been developed, miniaturization had also come to market, had been diffused, and so that contributed to the commercialization of the microprocessor. So then the story is about Xerox PARC and Steve Jobs. So the Xerox PARC had actually developed a system, with a microprocessor and a mouse and pull-down menus and all kinds of things. And Steve Jobs toured the Xerox PARC and saw it all, and ended up hiring Larry Tesler and several other PARC employees, because this was what he needed in order to bring the Macintosh to life. And Xerox couldn't envision a world without paper and copiers. So in this story, you see a lot of things coming together with regard to diffusion. You see somebody from the outside coming in and seeing what was possible and having a vision and a destination for these pieces, and this opportunity comes along and he's like, this is what I need. And he's able to hire people away from Xerox PARC, do that technology transfer into Apple, and produce the product. And all the while, of course, this whole innovation is sitting right under Xerox's nose. And this is something, again, that we're going to re-look at when we get to Utterback, because oftentimes the big company, Xerox, which is in the paper and copy business, is not able to see a world clearly without paper and copies, right? So the microcomputer, or the Macintosh, of course, gives us an ability to do something without printing, without typing. We can send things, and there's a lot of innovation there that is going to really limit the need for a copy machine. And it's very difficult for companies like Xerox and, Digital Equipment and Kodak and all of these, big companies with millions and millions of dollars and people to be able to see through to the next stage. And so the entire, mini computer or personal computer left Xerox and, went to Steve Jobs. So a really interesting story about how innovation and commercialization take place. Even though Xerox paid for the recognition of needs and problems, the basic and applied research, the development, they weren't able to commercialize it because they couldn't see the destination. So then diffusion and adoption. So there's a couple of key things when we're talking about diffusion and adoption: gatekeeping, controlling the flow of messaging through communications channels. So if you're trying to diffuse something new, trying to change something, those gatekeepers are really difficult to deal with. Those are the people that are there to protect the status quo. They're there to make sure that nothing changes. So that's going to be something that, as change agents, we've got to be able to deal with. Clinical trials, a way to, scientific experiments designed to determine the prospectivity of effects of an innovation in terms of safety and, and things like that. So obviously, clinical trials, when we're talking about medicine and things like that, are necessary because we need to make sure that our invention isn't killing someone. Consensus development, a process by which people come together, the stakeholders come together to decide whether or not this is going to work. So sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't, and you've got to find a way through it. So these are ways that diffusion and adoption take place, and we've seen in our stories examples of this, but that's not always going to be the case. One great example they give for diffusion and adoption is the agricultural extension model. So this is something I happen to know about firsthand. I am a Michigan State University Master Gardener, and this is a fantastic model for diffusion and adoption. So the way that this works, the ag schools, so Michigan State in Michigan is our ag school, Ohio State in Ohio, Iowa State. These are and each of the 50 states was given money to establish a land grant organization that was responsible for educating the community on agriculture. And so the book does go through the details of how land grant universities came about. The neat thing about the program, though, which is very old now, it's almost 200 years old from when it began, I think. And so the way that it works is Michigan State has a lot of innovation that takes place in agriculture. And what they do is they have a process called the Michigan State Extension Program, where a lot of the Michigan State professors and other change agents are part of this extension program. And they educate the public in how to manage and diffuse these types of agricultural innovations. So they have what's called the Master Gardener Program. So you sign up, it's basically one college course. So it's 14 weeks long, and there's tests and quizzes and things, and they're teaching you scientifically proven ways of improving, agricultural outcomes. So they go through everything, gardens and flowers and trees and bushes and soil and water and all the things that you as a gardener that can replicate success, you need to know. So a lot of gardeners are very passionate about gardening, but learned from maybe their mother or their grandmother, their father, or whatever it was, but they don't know for sure whether what they're doing is going to be successful every single year. And with research-based knowledge, you do, and that's what the Master Gardener Program is all about, is diffusing research-based knowledge. And then as Master Gardeners, our job is to go out into the community, and it's actually a volunteer program. So I volunteer to spend 20 hours in the field to help people in the public understand more things about gardening. So I can work anywhere that is a volunteer place, that is a charity of some sort or a nonprofit. I do most of my work at the Christ Child House in Detroit, and I teach the boys there. This is the group I mentioned earlier. This is a foster home for troubled children. We get 5 to 13-year-olds, and every year I teach them how to garden. And so we work in the garden. We build an organic garden with vegetables, and they go from turning their nose up at green peppers to picking them right off the bush and eating them in the yard. So this is a way to diffuse information out to the community in a really inexpensive way. And the neat thing is that MSU, so I get emails from MSU every week. Each different group that I'm interested in, whether it be turf and trees and vegetables, sends me an email on new things to know that are going on right now, based on our weather and water conditions and things like that. So we learn all the time, and we're required to do 10 hours of knowledge building every single year. So it's a phenomenal model for the diffusion of, of innovations in agriculture. And I was happy to see it in the book, and especially a book that's this old, that it's been going on forever. So a really good model for getting everybody on board and understanding how to diffuse new innovations. Consequences, this is something that we've seen throughout the book, the changes that occur to an individual or social system as a result of the adoption or rejection of an innovation. So, it's hindsight is 20/20, so it's harder for us to see the consequences, to anticipate what's going to happen, because we're not really sure who's going to use our innovation. And it's important for us to know that the intended users may not be the ones that are the final users. The minoxidil and the Rogaine, a perfect example. Tracer studies help us to reconstruct the sequence of main events so that we have an understanding about the decisions that took place in an innovation decision process. But again, consequences are tough to anticipate. The link here, I would encourage you guys to click on and listen to. It's only 4 minutes, so it's really short, but it shows you the consequences of introducing wolves back into Yellowstone National Park. So at some point they were gone, and I'm not sure what led to that, but there was a decision made to reintroduce them into Yellowstone National Park. And this is a very quick video about all of the changes that took place when this one animal was introduced back into the ecosystem. So it really gives you an idea of the far-ranging consequences of this, of a particular diffusion, and a really great story. So I think that is it. Yep, that's the end of Rogers. So anyway, we'll come back with the next section with video 3. Thanks.